Amy Vetter. Wow. What a great conversation. What a very impressive person. Just my goodness, so professional, so I'm going to say polished. She would not like that term, but her story is an incredible one. I got introduced to her by a TEDx that she did, where she talks about how above her bed, in her bedroom, was a sign that said, "Don't tell your daughter to marry a doctor or lawyer. Tell her to be one." While that sounds to be, altruistic and with great intention, it had detrimental effects, and a whole series of events happened after that. Just a fascinating story. She decides to become a CPA at 12 years old. She becomes partner in a CPA firm at 32. But of course, so much happens in between there, where she was sick when she was pregnant, and doctor said she couldn't work out. She could only do yoga, which turns to this life of yoga that she really, really pursues, and becomes a major partner in life, helps her with her business. And now she introduces both of those aspects, or marries those aspects. She's an author of 3 books, but B3, where business plus balance equals bliss. Just a really great conversation. Just excellent speaker. I love talking to Amy. We talk a lot about business, about her perspective and what she does. Great conversation with Amy. I know you're going to enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, and their passion, and their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Way, Amy Vetter. So nice to meet you. I really appreciate your time today. How has the principles of yoga taught you to be better in business?
Well, it kind of happened over little by little. I didn't start yoga thinking that. But I, actually didn't even start yoga on purpose. I had gotten sick after a pregnancy and was told that was the only thing I could do. And so I started yoga and just started going because I couldn't do other workouts that I wanted to do. And I started realizing just the silence, how much I wasn't observing what was going on inside of me, the feelings that I had, any kind of energy I was creating during the day. It kind of gave me some opportunity to review it. And so that happened slowly over time, of just that awareness. And I also remember in the beginning, the teacher saying, just slow down your breath, inhale, exhale, talking about all this stuff with your breath. And I was like, I don't buy into that. I'm just going to ignore that. And then over time, it just started happening, of just repetition and going into class and realizing how much that reset me by just breathing slower, being more intentional about my breath. And I started noticing if I brought that into a stressful situation at work, it was like, oh, I remember how that felt in yoga class. Maybe if I'm stressed out, if I take a few deep breaths, how that would feel. And it just slowly, little things that I was learning over time started I would say integrating into me as a business person,
Mm.
and until I was more aware that it was even happening.
Mm. Did it turn into meditation as well?
So meditation, honestly, is something that I've always struggled with. Uh, I have to be very intentional about doing meditation. So I am a type A personality.
Yeah.
I've always had a lot of goals, and business is one of those things where you've got a million things on your mind all the time. And I've done so much research and work around meditation. Obviously, as a yoga instructor, you learn a lot about it over time. I've taken workshops and so forth. But one thing I realized is that if I'm going to do it, I have to be intentional because it doesn't come naturally to me.
Mm.
So, and the other thing that I realized about it was that I had to start small. So I think a lot of people think about meditation as like, oh, you've got to do it for 30 minutes, or, these meditators out there that are master meditators, you've got to do it for long periods of time. But really, that's not the case. It's just that you do it. And so I started out with just a couple minutes. Can I sit still for a couple minutes without movement? So I can be aware, like in a not a meditative state, but because it's different just sitting still. But yoga for me, moving and being
Mm.
very much aware of my feelings and emotions was something that I could do moving, but sitting still was the harder thing.
Hmm.
And so I just would set the time for just a couple minutes. And I think those apps that are available, like Headspace and Calm, those are extremely helpful because you can pick a guided meditation that resonates with you that day, and you can say how much time you want to spend on it. And so I kind of broke it up, and I still do, where it's something at the beginning of the day and before I go to sleep. So it doesn't have to be long, each are 10 minutes. And that for me is enough, in the day. But some people want the 20 minutes all at one time. It depends what
Mm. Mm.
your makeup is, and how flexible your schedule is as well.
And doing it 10 in the morning, 10 in the evening, the morning helps the better day, the 10 at night helps you sleep better?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that happens in the beginning of our day, we automatically go into like, oh my God, I got to
Mm.
get this done.
Right.
So it helps you to kind of get still and center yourself before the day begins. I think what's also important about it at the beginning of your day too, and I talk about this a lot in my book, it's just that we come into meetings, we come into experiences during the day, and we don't realize what we bring into those meetings ourselves,
Mm.
what is going on inside of our bodies and our mind. And so a lot of times we can walk away from a meeting being mad at someone else or even a friend or family member, and we don't take that time and say, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I was thinking that, or that was sitting there, or even that you're really tired. And so the way I look at meditation is like research. It's an observation, it's not judgment. So let's say,
Hmm.
you're meditating and you observe you are tired. When you come out of it, it's like, okay, what do I have to do to bring myself back into equilibrium? So do I need to work out, bring my energy up? Do I, maybe I need a little caffeine, whatever it is,
Mm.
but just knowing that I'm carrying that in my day rather than showing up to every meeting like, oh, I'm so tired. Because that energy is contagious, right? So when I show up and say that, then the other people start going, oh, I'm tired too. I've had that. And it just happens. And then it's very hard to get the energy for what you need to accomplish. And I would say at the end of the day, for me, again, there's so much activity through the day, so many meetings, so forth, even presenting. And so at the end of the day, just to have that guided body scan and just allow yourself to review your day and release it so that you can sleep rather than, just going straight to sleep, watching TV or working, going to sleep, like having that moment to just allow your body to like unwind from all that's sitting in
Mm.
there.
Yeah, deflate.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Amy, as a child, you had a sign. in your bedroom, in your household. Don't tell your daughter to marry a doctor or a lawyer. Tell her to be one.
Yes.
While the intentions seem to be pure, it did have some detrimental effect to you.
Yeah. I would say so. I mean, the interesting thing about that, it was such a different time for women.
Mm.
And, when I was younger, my mom, uh, she was an art teacher and then stayed at home and then ended up opening her own business. And so a lot of the reading she gave me, a lot of the discussions we had, including that plaque that was above my head, was all about, being independent. So I had a vision in my head of what success was and what a successful woman would be like. And there wasn't a lot of examples at the time of leaders that were women.
Mm.
There were definitely female careers, but not necessarily, the same kind of vision as you see with a lot of men, when you were younger. So, I mean, we're lucky to live in such a different world now, and we always have to keep striving for more. But what it did was take me away from looking inside into what is it that I want to do versus what are the careers that are defined as success. Right. So I didn't become a doctor or lawyer, I became a CPA, but I would say all
Mhm.
of those were kind of in line of, this is how you financially succeed. And it's true. I've had a very lucrative career as an accountant and a CPA, but one of the things I teach, and I talk to even college students about this as well, is to know what is the value you want to create in the world, because your career goals, if they're aligned with that, even if you've got a bad first job, or in the college world you're taking a class you hate, you understand your long-term vision of what you want to create in the world, so you can get past those things because you know what the value is you want to create in the world. And I think we're a lot of times flipped in this conversation, and that's a great example of it, of like, this means money, and if that is your value, then you are aligned with it, right? But there's a lot of ways to create wealth, and a good, and however you define wealth, because that could mean that you're providing just enough for your family, and that is good. Like, it doesn't have to be extreme. Like, it's how much do you want? But I do believe that if you're passionate about the things that you do, money comes. And I think for so long, people have lived with a very, belief systems that have been given down generation to generation. And then we're not sure, like, is that my belief or is that somebody else's belief?
Mm.
And, being really clear on what your own beliefs are. And, honestly, meditation practices are, I call it in my book, Disconnect to Connect, those times of silence where you can truly observe, what is it? What are the, who am I? What do I believe? All of those kinds of questions you can ask yourself during a meditation kind of help you to come out of it and say, okay, am I aligned with that? Or do I need to make little shifts or pivots in my life to make sure I'm creating the value that I want?
Hmm. But you kind of glossed over the fact that, when you were young, you were driven. At 12 years old, you decided to become a CPA, Amy.
Yes.
12.
Yes.
12, I think I wanted to be Superman. I'm not sure, but
And I can't say I knew exactly what a CPA did. Um,
uh,
and so my grandfather had been a CPA. And so again, this is, generational belief systems that get passed down. So my grandparents were immigrants to the United States, and that creates a very different belief system in a family when you're close to the generation that has been immigrants. And I think it's an important, um because sometimes I can think we get too far away from what those people sacrificed to get here, their
hmm.
dream and vision of what they thought America meant, to come here. And so, they lived in very poor neighborhoods in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so the accounting profession was very new at the time. So he became a CPA in 1933.
Wow.
And I think the profession started in 1887 when I've looked back at it. And so, what I was hearing growing up was very different than what the profession actually is now, because immigrants in immigrant neighborhoods, first of all, he was one of the first people to graduate college, which was going to change the family forever. So, and this is true about the profession. And if you ask accountants, they will say the same thing. It's a very safe and secure career. Like, everyone always needs an accountant, so that you're in a secure career. And that was important for them, to be able to provide that for their families. But the way if I look back at the stories I heard when I was younger, it was that, my mom would get a new fur coat every year because he had a furrier as a client. Well, they were bartering, so it was
Mm,
immigrants trying to help each other, be able to succeed and get to that next level, which is very different than how we do it today. And so, what I've also looked at over time of how much the profession changed when he became a CPA, you know, the depression was just starting, so we didn't have all the regulation that we have in this day and age that accountants are trying to keep up with. Like, they can barely keep up with that. So those relationships I heard that he had as an accountant when I entered the profession, it was very much sitting at your computer,
mm.
and I've been trying to change that in the profession, since I, have pivoted in my career, to get more focused on the clients, like our beginnings were, where take the technology and automation we have to do a lot of that work so we can spend more time with our clients. And that's really what he did at the time. And so that was what I had heard of it. And so I was always saying I was going to be CPA, but in parallel, I played viola, and I painted, and I very much loved art and music. And so in my head, I was always like, am I really going to be a CPA, or do I want to go into the arts? And when I was 16, my mom lost her business. And that changed our life forever after, because we lost our house. My brother and I started working 3 jobs just to help keep up with the bills and the things we needed in the house. And so when that happened, I was like, I'm definitely going to be a CPA. There was just no right or left to it, because all these years I had heard what a safe and secure career was, and I didn't
Mm.
want to go through what my mom had gone through or our family had gone through. And so, it really took, me climbing in my career, becoming a partner eventually in a CPA firm. And when I became partner, I wasn't as happy as I thought I was going to be that
Right.
day. And so I went to my therapist instead of celebrating, and basically was like, why am I not as happy as I thought? And he's like, because you're living somebody else's dreams and you're not living your own. And so you've got to now do the work. And my message in all of this, I mean, it took many, many years of going through that journey, but it isn't necessarily quitting, because we all have these moments, right, where life turns upside down and we don't expect it. And it's more using these practices to observe and then say, I have all this expertise in one area. So do I believe in accounting? Absolutely. Do I believe what it does for clients, small businesses? That still is my value system. But can I do something that would be more aligned, that gives me joy and happiness? Can I take that expertise and combine it so that I can create what I call more work-life harmony?
Yes, you're B3. But going back to when you became partner, you talk about something that one of the partners said to you that just rocked you and changed the trajectory maybe
Yeah.
forever.
And he didn't mean it to be bad. It was actually a good thing.
Right.
So I had made partner at 32 years old. So I
Yeah.
was still fairly young. Looking back now, right? You don't feel it at the time, but, um, and he had come in to congratulate me the day I became partner. And he said to me, I'm so glad to know who I'm going to retire with one day. And I just pause and I'm like, I'm 32. So I'm here 30 more years. I got nothing more to achieve because I'm still a goal oriented, achieving person. So he certainly didn't mean it in a bad way, but I did
Right.
take it like, I'm not done. Where do I go from here? What do I accomplish next? And it was actually, one of those things that, because I had just started yoga at the time, I'd actually just started therapy at the time. And it was an important thing to happen because I had never woken up from driving myself on a career versus what is the value, my personal purpose,
Mm.
am I aligned with it? And what would be next, from here? And so that's where the journey kind of started, because it made me go on the journey of really researching myself and really trying to see what belief systems were mine, what belief systems did I carry from generations past, and what is it that I wanted to create in the world.
Have the courage to live the life that is true to yourself and not what others expect of you.
Yes. Because I think we all fall into that, right? And whether, intentionally or unintentionally, that could be, like me, where I was following the path of what my parents have wanted me to do, or it could also mean like you just end up in circumstances where you kind of get closed in, and there's a lot of people that need you to be who you are,
Mm.
and so that could be anything. That could be your customers, that could be your new, your family today, not your family of origin. That could be you're in a partnership. There's all sorts of things that start trapping you, and you start, you know, doing things in your life just to make sure those people are happy, instead of really truly understand. Not that you don't have a responsibility to people that you love, but you do have a responsibility to yourself as well, because we truly only have one life to live. And so, you don't want to look back and say, wow, like that wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. And
Mm.
now it's too late.
You talk about when you got your became a yogi, right?
Yes.
Your training certificate, that you put it right next to and kind of equivalent with your CPA.
Yes. Well, it
And
was it
and
was one of those things. So I, what you're talking about was becoming a yoga teacher, and um, one of the things, all the training I did, all the schooling I did, was based on expectations of what my mom had wanted me to do, growing up. And so when I started going through this journey, and I am a learner, so, I practiced yoga as a student, but one thing that was really getting to me was like, why do I feel so different when I do yoga versus another workout? And,
mm,
how it's helping me in ways that I can't really understand. And so I decided to sign up for yoga teacher training, because I wanted to learn more. I wasn't sure I was going to be a yoga teacher, but I did, want to learn more. That was my goal with it. And I did. You start learning philosophy and breath work and all these other aspects beyond anatomy, beyond like actually teaching. But it's important to understand kind of the origins of it, and the benefits of it, all these things of that are happening, but you don't really know why. And
mm.
so that process started happening, and I realized like how much I did love. I am a speaker, always have been.
Great
And
speaker.
so I love educate, so then if I have a passion for something, I love sharing that. And I graduated, and the teacher training I went to was like 8 or 9 months long, but at the end of it culminated in Costa Rica for a week. And so you kind of have this whole intense process of the last 40 hours just being there away from your life kind of thing to finish it. And I remember, um, there was very few people that actually graduated this teacher training. And so I was really proud to have gotten through it. It was the first time I had ever made a choice for myself of what I was going to do. It wasn't based on anyone else.
Hmm.
And I had called my mom in the airport on the way back. And I had said, I just want to let you know I finished this. I'm going to be a yoga teacher. And she's like, well, you're not going to tell anyone about this. And I was like, no, I'm going to put this right next to my CPA certificate
Yes,
because what it
yes.
represents is something that I truly did for myself. And I had never actually looked inside to say,
Mm.
like, this is something I want or I need, without a goal. Like, I really didn't, I was all, I'm a very goal oriented person, but I really went into that with no intention except to learn.
You talk a lot, Amy, about your internal stories and
Mhm.
how to disconnect from your back stories. Explain what you mean,
So, when I'm talking
please.
about all of these belief systems that we carry, it's very hard to know where those come from unless you do the work. And so, one of the things that happened, when I put out my original book, Business Balance Bliss, people would always ask the question, well, how do you get started? Where did you begin? And so I recently launched this book, Disconnect to Connect. And to me, it's the prequel to the B3
Hmm.
method, because it does take self journey and self work. And that's the harder thing to do. There's lots of little things you can band aid, right? But the work is when we actually decide to look internally and have the courage to do that. It takes a lot of courage to do those things, I think. I've owned multiple yoga studios, and it's always interesting when people come in and they're like looking around, kind of like what's happening in here.
Mm, mm,
And the courage to be on your mat by yourself with your mind sometimes is more courage than going to CrossFit. Right? It's easier
mm,
to walk in to do a workout than when you know that you're going to just be alone with your mind, during something like that. And so, a lot of the stuff sometimes, you just have to take the step there, but that's what starts teaching you that when you take yourself out of your routine. And I just did that this weekend. I went to my own summit conference. I wasn't speaking. But I needed inspiration. I needed that self review because, like
mm,
all of us in business, you're constantly like churning, and sometimes you can't solve something, and you need that space. And so, if we don't give ourselves space to get silent, it's very hard to observe what's going on inside of us. And I know and yoga doesn't necessarily need to be the thing. Like sometimes I go running and my brain processes and I'm like, wow, I'm solving something I didn't even mean to solve,
mm.
or it could be painting or whatever it is. But um for me, going through that process of therapy and yoga was the first time that I was deconstructing things that I thought I believed, but
Hmm.
it wasn't necessary. Like, and we have a different perspective as we get older. I know for me, having children really struck that for me because you're kind of bought into just what you know, and then you get put in a new situation or with new responsibility, and then you're like, wait, is this the way I would have done it? Like, do I really believe
Mm,
that, or what I do, or is that actually uncomfortable for me? And so that questioning process, again, it's not judgment, it's just a questioning process of giving yourself that space to be questioning all of your thoughts. Like, is that me or is that somebody else? What do I believe?
it's interesting how I'm of a certain age. I'm 55, and
Mhm.
I just still find myself questioning what I believe at
Mhm.
times. Is this really what I believe and what I want, or is this kind of what I've been kind of conditioned a little bit? And you have to kind of reflect
Yes.
and decide.
Yeah. And that's what I always say too, is that there's no like end game to this.
Mm,
um, what you're trying to achieve is awareness. So, I think the difference for me at 32 years old to now is that I know when I get off, and I know when I'm feeling something and I let it happen rather than growing up, I would just push it down, and keep
Mm.
going, and that was the way I knew how to be. And so really allowing yourself to question, to notice is not selfish, because it's actually good for the people around you as well,
Mm.
because when you're more aware of it, when you're finding those moments of like, oh wow, like if I just shifted this one little thing, look at like the outcome I would have on all these people around me, like not just myself, you're actually giving gifts to people.
Yeah, because if you're happy and you know what makes you happy, then your friends think they know what make you happy, so they'll try to, support that. But when it really doesn't, then everything is really off kilter, isn't it?
Yes. And you can feel it. I was, there's times when everything's going wrong in your life, like, and
Mm.
you're complaining, you notice yourself complaining about every person, even like going through the grocery line or whatever it is, like just everything is a bad experience. And
Yeah.
those are the moments a lot of times to pause and be like, well, I'm the common denominator happening in these situations. So what is the message to me? And it's another thing I talk about in the book about 100% accountability, like responsibility, is that a lot of times we get into conversations or meetings that are going bad, and we don't take the time to reflect on, was there a different way I could have gone about that? Is there a different way I could have responded or not responded? Because a lot of times we respond
Mm.
faster than just taking a pause before we respond. So all of those things are really important in our own journey and just growth as a human, to keep being aware of it.
Your second book, Balance and
That was my
Bliss, right?
first
So it's
book. Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's your first
Yeah.
book. Uh, B3, business plus balance equals bliss.
Yes.
So is happiness is the goal?
Yeah. So what I'm trying to demonstrate there is it's being accountable, right? So, and
Mm.
really naming the things that we can do. So the business side of it is like the stressors we have in our life, whether it's trying to strive for a promotion, meet deadlines, having a hard internal relationship, whatever those things are, right? That are giving our stress in our day. And we can offset that by what I call just our human toolbox, just mindfulness and collaboration techniques. And what I have found with those techniques, and in that book, I call them B3 basics, things that you can put right into your day that are just a couple minutes that reset you. Um, those things are things we practice so that they become like it. We're developing our neural channels to create a new habit. But we have to
Mm.
be intentional to do that, because it doesn't just happen because we want it to. And a lot of times for me, I have found over the years that uh it's like an insurance policy, because when things are going bad, you can't just start right then, like,
Mm.
like you've actually, I have found that what's helped for, because I've learned breathing techniques, or because I've learned to meditate, like I know to click in is like, oh, I need that right now, like, so it's just, you've kind of trained your mind to look for those techniques you have right inside yourself. When I talk about bliss is not necessarily something you find from the outside, you find from within.
Hmm.
And so those are the things each day, again, being accountable and responsible to yourself, that you identify that bring joy to yourself. And bliss, actually, where I'm deriving that from in yoga, there's a Sanskrit term called Satchinanda. And what it means is that you exist. And I feel like so many times we forget we exist in a day because we're rushing through the
Mm.
day. Things are coming at us. We're just serving other people, whether it's at work, whether
Mm.
it's home, whatever it is. And we're actually not realizing we exist and we matter.
Hmm.
And so practices of that is like trying things to remember, like, okay, that brings me joy. This hobby, this moment, whatever does that for you. And if it is being with other people, being intentional about making sure you're doing those things to surround you. If you're someone that needs to retract and is more introverted, but that does bring you joy, you need to do that. You need to be intentional about what those
Hmm.
things are so that you can maintain happiness, and even if it's just a few moments in your day. I think so many times we're looking for the outside to make us happy instead of finding where we can find that happiness right within inside of ourselves.
Mm. It seems simple, but it's really a
It
lifelong
is.
journey.
It for sure is. Yes.
Amy, are you still writing notes on paper with pen?
Yes.
Yeah, I am too. I'm right here. I have lists of notes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I heard you talk about some technology tools that you use to kind of arrange things,
Yes.
and I do the same thing. But I just find if I don't write them down, I forget
Yeah.
them even as we talk.
Yeah.
As far as technology has got, and I'm a technologist like yourself. I just start with the pen to paper for me.
Yes. Well, and I agree with you. Post-it notes are my thing to tell me what my
Mm,
priorities are for the day. There's lots of tools out there that I list about, setting reminders. But what I will say that from an automation standpoint is I use my calendar that feeds through my phone that gives me
oh my
reminders
goodness.
or blocks
Yes.
time for those things. So even if
Yes.
I have things written on a post-it, I will have time blocked on my calendar to do those things, because I think what happens is we keep putting those, and that list keeps longer and longer, but we're not actually blocking time to make sure we can do that, which only creates more stress, which then creates negative energy to the people around us when we don't even intend it.
Mm. Yeah, I live by my calendar, and that needs to be automated because that needs to be shared. And you talk about the importance. One of the big things you made a big change was getting a virtual assistant.
Hmm. Yeah. And so I know early in my business, that was one thing when I was a solo practitioner, is that when I got a virtual assistant, that was huge because she could block my calendar.
Mm,
But also where I'm not getting phone calls all day, where I can set time of when I'm going to call that person back. Again, I live by my calendar. Or actually vet the person calling if it's worth the time to meet with that person, or their things can be answered, or it's just not aligned in the work that I do.
mm,
Um, as I have grown in my business, I have, someone that does that in my business and manages the calendar. But the automated tool that I still use is Calendly. Like, I think that tool's been incredible for someone that's not internally in my organization, that I can block hours, and be able to not have to go through my calendar and five times manually to give to someone, that they can just go on there, find the times that work for them, and it sets the appointment and everything else. So that's a way with technology to be able to streamline that and then save you time from having to respond to a million emails and work that out.
yeah, this this very conversation. Well, I don't use Calendly; I use a competitor. But this very conversation was set on mine, and it sends reminders. And um, I love. I heard you talk about, and when I talk with a lot of business owners in technology or any field, how delegation is a hard thing for the owner.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing about delegation, again, it's a mindfulness process to go through. And it's
Yeah.
really interesting, because I have my own podcast as well. And I did an interview, with a partner of a CPA firm. Uh, on It ended up being about this topic. It really started out, and I think this is an important thing, that kind of is a feeder to it if you struggle with it, is about getting feedback. And I think the thing with leaders a lot of times is that as people grow in their levels in career, it's a lot harder to get feedback, because people are afraid to give you that feedback for fear that they might lose their job or you might not like them
Mm,
and so forth. So
mm,
what we were talking about was 360s. And so if you're in a bigger organization where you get feedback from the people underneath you, your peers, and the people you report to. And he decided to do it as a live 360. So I had never heard of that before. And where he brought his entire department into a room, palms up, right? And this is really where a mindfulness practice has to come into play, because if you're going to go into a room and get feedback and you ask for feedback, you can't be defensive, because then people
right.
are going to shut down, right? And there's mindfulness practices you can go through to get yourself present and still before you walk in. However, so he did this, and one of his, lead managers that works for him, said, "You don't delegate enough." And so he said, "Well, why do you say that?" And this is very important, is like learning open-ended questions and not getting defensive.
Mm, mm, mm,
And she said, "Well, it makes me feel like you don't trust me."
mm,
And he was shocked, because on his and I do a lot of courses like this on intentional time management, and whenever we
mm,
go through this topic, a lot of leaders feel like, well, one, which is the natural inclination, I don't have time to go train someone on this, so I'm just going to do it myself. So there's that. But the second one is, if you feel like you're going to overwhelm the person, you're afraid to delegate. It's not about trust sometimes. It's about like you actually have good intention. And so this is always interesting, because and
mm.
I talk about this in my book, it's perception versus reality. So we have two people sitting there believing different things about the same thing. And it was never his intention for her to feel not trusted. And so this is why conversation is so important. So if you have work to do, first of all, getting comfortable to let someone else do the work without you instructing it, like let them go through the process, but also to have those conversations with people that work for you. Do you have capacity for me to give you this project? It doesn't mean you have to
Mm.
say right now you have to take it, but if you can take this off, I would love for you to, if it works in your schedule or priorities. And so those conversations don't happen enough, where people can come together and actually, find that place of trust, and also to know that they can say no too, and that if they take that on, what thing could be deprioritized. So it really happens from both sides of it, to make sure that you've got that communication channel open properly.
Yeah, I've heard some CEOs and business owners still order the pizza. They can't even delegate that, and I heard you say that, you know, they shouldn't care about the process, only the end results.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how they got there as long as the goal's met.
Yes.
That's how we have to look at it.
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest part for leaders, is like they go through a certain process to get to the, what I always
Right.
found interesting, in my accounting practice is, and this is something you have to resist when you're trying to train yourself to do it, is when you delegate something or you give something to a staff person, they know how to do it, right? So
Mm.
anyone's first, inclination is to call me and say, I've got to do, can you tell me what you want me to do with this? And I started learning to say, I want to see how you get there. Like, and then we're going to talk about it. So
Mm.
I'm not going to tell you how to get there. You can go to this place and this place to research. I can show them how to, what I call, go fish, right?
Mm.
But I'm not going to tell them the way to get there. And for me as a leader, it's really important to see how they get the outcome, even if it's the wrong outcome, so that I know how to train them to get the right outcome. Because the problem is, if you don't train them, then you're constantly going to end up having to do that work and overload yourself. The second piece is, a lot of times I would find the staff got to the right answer, but I was like, oh, I didn't know you could go that route. to get it,
Mm.
where it's a learning process for you too. Like,
Hmm.
think of how many technology tools different generations use that you wouldn't think to use because that wasn't something you would ever go to in your head. And there's been a number of times in my career that I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, even as simple
Mm.
as when I had my yoga studio, I had my son at the time working the front desk. And so they would have to do like the social media posts on Facebook and so forth. And he came home one day and he was like, Mom, why do you use Facebook? That's for old people. And so I said, well, that's my customers are on Facebook. And he's like, yeah, but you're never going to get people my age because we're on Snapchat. And so I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, well, you're in charge of Snapchat. Like, you figure
Hmm.
that out and, show us how that would work for advertising. And that would never have been a way for me to think to get customers for the studio. It was his vantage point. So it doesn't matter like what level somebody's at. And I think, so many times we're so focused on title, but all these different perspectives when we open up the channels that people feel comfortable to give suggestions, we end up learning new things where I would have never thought about that in a million years.
Mm. And then sometimes, Amy, the opposite happens where, I had a phrase in my office where, a technician or somebody would come in the office with a problem. We got this huge problem, with the customer's unhappy. And then I would say, you know, don't Dan Rather me. Of course, I'm dating myself. Dan Rather was a news anchor. And I said, just don't give me the news. Give me at least two
Right.
suggestions of a solution and I will give you my feedback on it.
Yeah.
So don't ever Dan Rather me. So I guess that's
Yeah.
just your valid point right there. They come to with a problem. Well, let's hear some solutions right away. And you may come up with something that I didn't think
Right.
of. I think that's great. Try that.
Yeah. We get better by more minds coming together and creating
Mm.
ideas. And, in my book, I have a concept called becoming a connected leader. And this is part of it, is really like talking to the people that are closest to the customer and the relationships and the work, as we might be out there doing business development and strategy and trying to push through initiatives as a leader, but we are not on the day-to-day work that the staff has to do in order for all those strategies to be accomplished. And so
Mm.
when you feed into it, and be more know the people that work for you, know their names. It sounds so simple, but so many
Yeah.
people I've encountered don't know the names or what their partners' names are, or, like really getting to know people. But to open it up where, it's interesting because a lot of times I work with accounting firms and I talk to the partners about reaching out to staff and asking them questions. And their first thought is like, if I go reach out to them, they're going to think they're getting fired because I've never done that
Mm.
before. And so you actually have to prep that and say, I'm going to be making these random calls. You're not getting fired. I'm really looking for feedback. I'm looking for ideas. Another thing that I would do in my accounting business, I called it coffee talk, where I would give them 30 minutes once a month and I would pair up different people every month that didn't necessarily work together. They would get a Starbucks card. So if they were local, they could go to Starbucks. I've always had remote businesses. So if they weren't remote, they get their Starbucks separately. But the whole point of it was for them to just think about what needs to be fixed in the business or their ideas for the business. Just giving them that space to disconnect and talk to one another and surface their ideas. And, you get some of the best ideas that way because you don't even notice what they're noticing, or maybe something that clients are getting frustrated about that you don't realize they're getting frustrated about. And those would feed into our team meetings of ideas that came from those sessions. And so a lot can come from just allowing people that freedom to think and be creative.
We're really talking about communication here. Your quote The problem with communication is that you think that it happened.
Yes, exactly.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Well, because a lot of and I use another example of that because I think especially in careers like CPAs and other careers where it's very technical and we're talking to people that hire us that don't know what we know, because that
Mm,
is something that they're hiring you for. Um, and I always show the screen of like this very complicated chart and numbers or whatever. And I call it the elevator conversation, is that you go and present this to, to clients that are sitting across from your desk. You're asking them, do you understand? Yes. Do you understand? Yes. And then they get in the elevator and they're like, did you understand anything she said? Nope. Did you? But they're not going to admit it right then,
mm.
right? And so we've got to figure out how to be in plain language in order to get the best out of meetings and communication and relationships, and making sure we're asking the right questions of what is the output that someone wants to see, like what's important to them. And that's all with communication, right? We have to teach ourselves how to ask those types of questions. And I think, in my experience, I've been in sales organizations. The best training is for salespeople, but more people need what sales training is. And sales
Mm.
training is open-ended question. It's an active listening because they are 100% commission based. And if they do not understand what you're saying, they don't make the money. So they're very motivated to ask enough questions so that they can close the sale. But there's just not enough of us that do that same type of training on active listening as leaders and as team members so that we get the most ideas coming to us.
Yeah, and right along those lines, Amy, I like how you talk about, especially in the large corporations, how a lot of these meetings are just a waste of time.
Yeah. So, and I think in respect to that, what I'm talking about is that we don't go through, and this is intentional time management, right? That we don't actually ask what a purpose of a meeting is when we get, so, meetings have changed a lot. That it used to be to make a meeting before shared calendars. You had to make a bunch of phone calls, coordinate a bunch of people. It was really hard to make a meeting. But now I can just pop a calendar appointment on and it's my
Yeah.
choice, yes or no. And I might be double booked, triple booked, whatever. So it's really important to, number one, if you're getting a meeting and you see there's other people on that meeting that could handle that meeting. Again, this comes back to delegation. Do I really
Mm.
need to be on that meeting? Can I trust the other people to handle that meeting? And sometimes we get invited to meetings just because they're afraid to not invite us. Like they think we want to be on that meeting. So that's number one. And number two is to make sure there's an agenda for a meeting. Like, what is the purpose of this meeting? To make sure that we have real outcomes that we're trying to create for this meeting. And if you push back and someone can't tell you what the agenda is, that meeting's probably not ready yet to be had. And then the other thing that I talk about with it is that, we can set 25-minute meetings instead of 30, 50-minute meetings instead of 60. The thing is, people will take
Mm.
meetings all the way to the end, even if they're repeating themselves. And
Mm.
so it's important that we set time again to disconnect
Hmm.
before we go to our next meeting. And it also helps us to not multitask, because if we know we've got a break between meetings, we can not read our email, we can stay focused, and we might even get that meeting done sooner if
Mm.
everyone's paying attention. But what happens a lot of times is people have their meetings bumped up, but they're still trying to do their email. They're still trying to do other things. And then they get asked a question because they're multitasking and they think that they can. And then they're like, oh, can you repeat that question? Well, you can't. You can't be working on emails, doing communication, and have your brain hearing all the details that it needs to hear. So it actually wastes other people's time when you're multitasking. So it is really important to have some sort of meeting intentions of how you're going to go about running that in your life so that you don't get stuck in this hamster wheel.
Yeah, because oftentimes, not often, but occasionally those meetings are just some ego led, vanity play, where but oftentimes, they can be like you say, if you have some goals set up. And I did work in the corporate environment for a couple years before I started my business, and I found that was the case often. That
Hmm.
was just kind of a waste. So Amy, I started my business in the 90s as a tech business, and I was like yourself, we're just dead set on goals, working 14-hour days. I was much younger back then, didn't have a lot of other responsibilities, and I wasn't treating my body correctly. I wasn't working out, and I got myself to about 340
Oh,
pounds.
wow.
And I had the doctor, I had an appointment with the doctor. My daughter had just been born, and she said to me, if you don't lose the weight, you're never going to see her graduate.
Mm.
So I took the next 7 months to, lose 130 pounds. So I did everything I was supposed to. And whenever I tell anybody this story, I could just see it in their eye. What did you do? What's the secret? Tell me how you did it. And I said, there's just one word: it's discipline. Right. That's how I lost the weight.
Hmm.
There's no magic bullet here. It's just discipline. You've mentioned discipline a lot in the many dialogues that I've listened to you in. How does discipline play a role in your life, Amy Better?
Well, it has to as an entrepreneur, because you can get overwhelmed in those long days. And my discipline, is really on how I run my day,
Mm,
because I've done the observation of the things that I need so that I show up the best that I can. So my mornings are very much like that's when my energy's the highest. So I know that's when I'm going to work out. I also, if I have individual work to get done, I can like slam through it before I get into meetings. But then I also know that to keep my energy up throughout the day, having meetings with other people the rest of the day keeps my energy up. So if I did solo work in the afternoon, I'm not going to get as much accomplished as I would in the morning. So I really structure my calendar so for that, and then I block time on my calendar of like work is done, even if it's not finished, right? Like you have to have
hmm,
a cutoff point. And so one of the things that and where I use my calendar as well is that I set priorities of what are the 2 to 3 things I need to accomplish today. Like, and I
hmm.
make sure there's either time block for it or the meetings that I'm having are fulfilling that. But I think a lot of times in our day, we just let the day happen to us and then we finish the day and we're like, I know I was really busy, but I'm
Mm.
just not even clear what I actually did or what I actually accomplished. So at the end of the day, you can see like, oh, I got this and this done, but this is still pending. So tomorrow that'll be the first thing I do. So you even like set your intention for the next day so that in your mind, it's going to be taken care of, that you've got a place for it, that just sitting there churning the hours isn't going to make it better for you or for anyone else because you're going to be exhausted.
I mean, time management is so crucial. I
Hmm.
mean, you're a speaker, you're a business owner, you're an author, you're so many things. So, how do you, how you're a mother, you're a wife. I mean, you're a bass player in a band. Last I heard, by the way. I hope you're still doing that. And so, how do you get three objectives? How do you prioritize those three or four, whatever they are? That's got to be quite a process.
Well, I know where my end point is, so one thing is, like you brought up the bass guitar, so one night a week there's band practice and that
Right.
makes me stop work, so
Hmm.
having like even scheduled out in your evenings, like what you're going to do with that time. Because the thing is, if you haven't scheduled that time in your evenings, then you're like, oh, I could keep working until 8 tonight or 10. Like I can keep going because I got nothing going on. And so,
Mm.
even if it's to read a book or to do whatever it is, I think that cutoff time is a really important thing, and to understand what you're going to do with that time as well. That's going to fill your cup, get you reset, and start over. So I know, certain things, whether it's seeing friends, going to dinner, doing stuff with the kids, whatever it is, like, I know that that's stuff I need, because if I don't do it, I'm not going to show up the next day the way that I want.
And I think that's your bass guitar right there behind your right shoulder.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
sure it's in tune. Yeah. Uh, what motivates you, Amy Vetter?
This work, for sure. Like, I
Mm.
actually just went to just a conference for me to go to this weekend, of just kind of resetting, and those things are important as an entrepreneur, that you get so wrapped up in the day to day. You need the visioning. You're the person that visions. And one of the focuses of the conference was to think of your 85-year-old self, and what advice would they give you today, and you know how to feel or not feel, at that point, and what do you want for your future self. And it was definitely like, I'm so driven by the value I'm able to create in this work that I do, that it, even on the hard days or the minute work that I don't want to do, like, it doesn't matter, because I get to do this work. And so, and it takes a while, I think, in your life to get there. You have moments of it, and even in this, like, there's really hard times with it and good times, but I definitely always feel like the purpose of what I'm doing drives me every day.
You get to do the
Get
work.
to.
It's a privilege to
Yes.
do the work.
Yes. Exactly.
It's great reframing. It's very different from I have to,
Yes.
or very different.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's very rewarding. How do you measure success?
So, that's one thing, like, we've stepped back a lot of times to look at, and it's how many people that we can reach, that might
Mm.
change one thing, or just doesn't have to be big things, but it's enough that it's an aha moment in their life that just made them step back and kind of think for a moment about themselves. Because we know when each person does that for themselves, it's better for everyone, our community, everyone we encounter. So you keep reaching more people by reaching each individual person.
Mm. And when you can make a, positive impact on someone's life, I don't know if there's any greater reward,
No,
Amy.
it really isn't. I mean, and I feel fortunate to be in this job, because I've definitely had a lot of jobs where you don't feel this way. I mean, um,
Mm.
when people tell you the impact it's made, or they clap at the end of your session. I mean, most people at work, if there's no one clapping for you at the end of the day, so you've got to
Right.
figure
Right.
out, like, what are those things that you're like, setting that own value system for yourself, that at the end of the day you can clap for yourself, um, because it's important to recognize it. I'm just fortunate where other people will reach out and say, this thing really helped me.
Certainly did. Amy Vetter, what a pleasure. I was so excited when you accepted this. Somebody told me
Me, it's been a pleasure to talk to you as well. My website is amyvetter.com, Vetter. We had the conversation about Eddie Vedder. It's
yes,
T's,
that's
not
right,
D's.
from Pearl
Yeah.
Jam. Yeah, she is T, yes.
And so, and then on there has all information. And then if you go
Mm.
to social media, I'm on every channel at Amy Vetter CPA.
Yeah, Twitter, lots of videos on YouTube. You have a podcast as well that you're excellent at, Instagram, and your books are available on Amazon. We'll make sure to put all the links there. Amy, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Perhaps if we're in the same area, we have a cup of coffee and talk a little bit more.
Sounds
You be well. Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations.